What is going on today, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Fix It Garage. It's time to finish up that engine and get it running in today's video. Last video you saw we replaced the piston rings, got the pistons all put back together. So today we're going to finish reassembling this engine and start it for the first time after our rebuild. Hopefully everything goes smooth, but let's jump right in the shop and check out some of these brand new parts that we picked up.
All right, just look at all of the new parts we have sitting here in front of us. This all came from Rock Auto. It is very difficult to get OEM new parts for a 96 D16Y8 Civic. OEM parts are in short supply, so we went ahead and went over to Rock Auto. And buying from them is very easy. They make these kits that fit multiple engines, and I'll be honest, I was concerned whenever I see something that fits multiple engines. That's always a red flag for me because it's like, how? Because their parts are different. Well, I've got my answer and it came immediately. So over here we have our head gasket kit, and you will see that in the kit, they've included 4 different intake gaskets. Now these are for the 4 different intake manifolds and cylinder heads that can be on a Civic. They gave me 2 different throttle body gaskets for the 2 different throttle bodies, and you can see the difference in size between them. And this is for only D series, by the way. And then over here on our lower end seal kit, 2 different oil pan gaskets, coolant O-rings. It came with the parts needed to put the engine back together depending on whether I've got the different pans, the different intakes. They make it really easy. So now when I would order again from them, I can order with confidence knowing that if it says it fits an engine, it's probably gonna fit that motor. Because looking at this, everything pans out and looks correct. Now it's time to install the cylinder head, and looking at the bottom of it, the machine shop did a fantastic job machining this head. They pressure tested it and cleaned it, so we are good to go with this cylinder head. All we need to do is put it back on the car. I've already put the dowel pins back in the block. Here we have our brand new head gasket from Rock Auto, and it looks to be about the same quality as an OEM one. So we're going to put this on. And because this thing has had multiple head gaskets, we picked up some brand new cylinder head bolts, and I've already checked they are the same length as the old ones. So we're going to use brand new bolts on this car this time, and we're going to follow the torquing procedure, which I will show you guys once we get the cylinder head back on the car. Always make sure you line up your head gasket and make sure that all the bolt holes line up and all of these holes line up. If they don't, you could have a coolant leak, or you could have a oil leak, or you could have something leak that we don't want. In this case, it is orientated correctly, so now we can go ahead and set the cylinder head back on here. Cylinder head's on. Now let's go ahead and install our new head bolts. It's always a good practice to put a little bit of oil on the threads of your head bolts. This prevents them from getting in there too tight and almost popping as you're torquing them. You want a nice even movement as you torque the head bolts. Grab my head bolt, give it a little bit of a dip, and put them in their holes. All right, so we have the bolts all snugged up, and now we need to torque them. The first torque sequence we need to put them to is they all need to be torqued to 14 foot-pounds. So not a lot, but we need to torque them all to 14 foot-pounds, and we can move on to the next torque spec. Wrench is set to 14. We're gonna go inside out to apply even pressure to prevent the head from warping as we torque it. The next torque spec that we need to do is 36 foot-pounds. This is going to be our second step of torquing. The next torque spec is 49 foot-pounds. Okay, so after you torque all of them to 49 foot-pounds, it tells you to go back
and torque the first 2 bolts again to 49 foot-pounds. This is because as you clamp the cylinder head to the block, the center bolts can start to come loose. So they have you do the inner 2 to 49. It'll probably be about a foot-pound off. So we'll go ahead and set those 2 to 49. That means all the bolts will have the right amount of stretch and they'll be clamping the head to the block. So we will not have coolant leak into our oil or vice versa. And this engine's going to run amazing. Just like that, yeah. Okay, they stayed at 49. So the cylinder head is now torqued. The next thing that we're going to be working on is we're going to work on getting the intake manifold. We're gonna get those back on before we start putting our cam and everything in, just because there's a little more room without all these parts in here. There's actually a lot more room. Here we have our nice Rock Auto intake manifold gasket. It's even got little sealing rings for the coolant and the EGR. So let's go ahead and get this bad boy installed. Okay, important thing to know when you're putting the rocker assembly back on is in the middle of the intakes on the EX VTEC Civics is the VTEC valve. I got stuck trying to install the rockers because I didn't reset these into the right place. It's really important to have them in the right place so they sit on the cam and don't try to wedge between the cam and the valves or anything else like that. So just make sure you line these up. Now we can put the top section back on and torque it and our valve train will be reinstalled. All right, so now that we have the valve train on, the next thing that we need to do is retime the car. So before we can put the belt back on, we need to check that our cam and our crank are in time. Camshaft has 2 little things to help. Here at the top, they have this little up that tells you that's up for cylinder 1, top dead center. And then they have these little marks that you can kind of see right here on the gear. Well, that mark is also on the back side. So what you do is you take a feeler gauge, and you slide it along the head surface up to there, and if they line up, you're timed correctly, which this motor is. Underneath the car, there is a mark above the oil pump, or on the oil pump, that's an arrow. Well, that arrow has to line up with that mark on the gear, which, as you can clearly see right now, they do. So now that it's timed, we can go ahead and we can start reinstalling the timing belt. The best way to do it is to start from the crank and work your way up to the cam, to the water pump, to the tensioner, and back down. That is what I have found through doing this for a long time. So what I'll do is I will hook it over, hook it onto my crank gear. And the idea behind when you do this is you don't want to spin the motor, otherwise we'll knock it back out of time. Keep good tension on the front edge, wrap it around your cam gear. Maintain good tension around your water pump. And then now we have to get it onto our tensioner. Trade you spots. Tensioner has a spring holding it in place, which allows for some movement. So the tensioner bolt is loose, and what I can do is pull on the tensioner and slide the belt back on, like so. So now, timing belt is on. That's simple. We need to adjust the tension on the tensioner. We can use our hand and move it around. I'll have to apply a little bit more tension and then tighten that 14mm bolt. That will set the tension. And then the last step that you need to do anytime you install a timing belt is you need to absolutely roll the engine around at least 2 or 3 times and make sure it stays in time. So we're gonna tighten up the bolt and spin the engine around. So we've rolled the engine around twice and it is still in perfect time. So we know the timing belt part is done. The next step is the least fun thing that I personally like doing on an engine. And that would be adjusting the valve clearance. Very important whenever you take off a cylinder head because they are changing the deck height of the motor to adjust the valves. Actually, anytime you pull the rockers off, you should really be adjusting the valves because this engine's been completely torn apart. We had a warped head. We need to adjust all the valves and make sure that the clearances are good so we don't have valves that open too far or ones that don't open enough. We're gonna go over the procedures for adjusting the valves for cylinder 1, and then I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of them real quick and we'll reconvene afterwards. Some old Hondas are very nice and they give you the valve lash right here on the hood. So we can see our intake valve is 0.2 millimeters plus or minus 0.02 and our exhaust is 0.25 plus or minus 0.02. I think if you're gonna spend money building engines, there's a few places where you should spend it. One is really nice torque wrenches. The second is really nice valve lash tools. It's very important that you get an accurate valve lash, especially when you're building a performance engine. The last thing you want is one that's inaccurate because that can lead to engine failures along the line.
How much performance are we getting out of this engine?
None. For a 1.6 liter Honda, you probably don't need the fanciest, but because I build other cars here and I do it for a living, having a nice set is a good idea. Also, you need to periodically check the thickness because if you adjust the valves enough, eventually these can wear thin and become inaccurate. I've already checked these because I keep track of them very closely at work with all the valve adjusts that I do. So I know these are accurate, so we'll grab our 0.2 and 0.25 millimeter feeler gauges out of here. On the feeler gauge, you'll see we have 0.203, 0.254. None of them are going to be the exact measurement. They're always going to be something like 0.203 or 0.254, something like that. I just usually ignore that very last digit because you're not going to be precise enough to where you need something down to 1/1000th of an inch, especially on a stock vehicle. Again, you can order more precision ones than these snap-on ones, but for building Hondas in the garage that are stock, these are perfectly fine. Oh well. All right. Yeah. So the first thing we did is we set it on cylinder 1, top dead center. And we're going to take our exhaust valve lashing tool and we're going to stick it between the rocker and the top of the valve, if it'll fit, which I don't think it will. And what we're feeling for is how much drag. Right now, I have to use a lot of force to drag this back and forth. It means the valve is way too tight. Honda's, simple. 10 mil wrench and a flathead screwdriver. Break the 10 mil loose. So right now we have our 10 mil loose and the adjuster, I'm spinning it. If you back it out enough, you can almost feel no tension. We don't want that either. We want to twist it down till we feel a little bit of drag on the feeler gauge. If I take my microphone to it, you can hear a little bit of drag. That's what we're feeling for when we do a valve adjust. That's about how much drag I like to have on a valve. So once we have the clearance where we like it, take our screwdriver. We're gonna try to hold the valve still and tighten down that nut and check it again. And it still feels good. So now we'll move on to the second valve for the exhaust. And again, very tight. And we'll check our drag, and when I get it to a point where I like it, Sean, and tighten it up. And check it, compare it to the other side, make sure they feel about the same, which they don't. When this one, you have to be really careful. When you tighten them, you need to be really careful because when you tighten this nut, it will try to spin the adjuster, which this did a little bit, so it actually tightened the valve up. So now I have to go through that process all over again. Good. All right, cylinder 1 is done.
I'm gonna go ahead and adjust the other 3. The trick when you do it is you'll roll the engine around to the next cylinder, which in this case will be cylinder 3, due to the firing order of Hondas being 1, 3, 4, 2. So we'll roll the engine to cylinder 3, which is a quarter rotation on the cam and a half rotation on the crank because of how the gear reduction works. So we're gonna roll it around to cylinder 3, adjust the valves, and then we'll go to 4 and 1, and we'll be done. But I will check back in with you guys when all the valves are adjusted. All right, valve clearance, done. We have the valves adjusted and set, so now the valve train is fully finished. Next, we can throw all the timing covers back on and our valve cover with a new valve cover gasket, and we'll have this engine completely sealed up. So we've got the timing cover and the valve cover back on, so the engine is now sealed back up. So now that we have all of this on, we kind of have a few choices for where to go next. We can start reassembling this side, put the distributor back on, our coolant lines back on, and all of that, or we can get all of our drive belt accessories reinstalled. I'm gonna go with drive belt accessories next. We're gonna get this side all buttoned back up so we can kind of work our way across the engine. So by the time we get over here, we'll be done putting this thing back together. All right, we've got our drive belts on, our power steering pump reservoir remounted, our cruise control reinstalled. So everything this way is now completely done. This side is fully reassembled and ready to go. Biggest thing when you're tensioning the belts, you don't want them too loose and you don't want them too tight. There's no real good way to figure it out. I've learned by how I press on the belt, I can feel if it's gonna be too tight or too loose. If I go to press on it and it doesn't move, it's too tight. If I press on it and it like flexes all the way in, it's too loose. So it's finding that point where it's just right when you push on the belt. Other than that, pretty straightforward installing the belts. Make sure you put the right ones in the right spot. These old Civics use 3 belts, which is incredibly stupid. They have one for the alternator, one for the compressor, and one for the power steering pump. They're all different lengths, but they're the same amount of ribs. So it gets really confusing. That's probably one of the least liked things about this car is the fact they run 3 individual belts. Stupid idea.
one belt is way better than 3 individual. Now that that side's done and our attempt to start moving down the engine, the next logical thing we need to install is the exhaust. Because there's a hole here. We should probably put the exhaust manifold on, and we can bolt the bottom of the exhaust back up and tighten all the bolts and have the exhaust done before we continue moving that way down the engine. And you're good. All right, this thing is now fully reassembled. Look at that, everything back installed. All that is left now is to fill this thing with fluids, fire it up, and hear how much better this sounds.
Fire in the hole.
Alrighty guys, and just like that, the engine is back up and running. It's running really well, and it's ready to be driven. However, we're not gonna be test driving it because there are still some things that we need to fix. Mainly those tie rods on the front. They're a little bit shaky, so we're gonna go ahead and we need to fix those first before we drive this thing on the road and test drive it and make sure that everything's all good on our test drive. So that is gonna do it for today's video. I wanna thank all of you guys for watching. If you like what you saw, don't forget to smash the like button. Leave some comments down below on this budget Civic. So far, we're still doing really good on our budget, which we will break down at the end of the series. But I wanna thank all of you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.